Eric Jorgensen. Welcome to the monthly Visible Trust Talks. Today I'm going to be talking with Lisa Cohen. I'm the Director of Beneficiary and Advisor Services at Visible National Trust, and we're pretty excited to kick off our series by diving into the very basics of special needs trusts. For those of you who are new here, Visible National Trust is dedicated to helping families and financial advisors navigate the complexities of financial planning for individuals with disabilities. Our mission is to provide comprehensive, accessible solutions that ensure long-term financial security and quality of life for loved ones with disabilities. Each month, we'll be hosting these live Q&A sessions on LinkedIn to address your most pressing questions about a special needs trust. We'll be recording these sessions and uploading them to our YouTube channel so you can revisit the information at any time. Joining me today is Lisa Cohen, the CEO and founder of Visible National Trust. Lisa has been a driving force in the field of special needs planning, and her expertise has helped countless families secure a brighter future for their loved ones. Lisa, thank you so much for being here today. We're thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be here with you and with everybody who's joining us today.
Fantastic. So before we get right into back to the basics, perhaps it would be helpful to give everybody an overview of who Visible is, what you do, what we do, and how it is we're having a conversation about the basics of special needs trusts.
Absolutely. So I'll begin with just a moment of personal introduction. Before coming to Visible National Trust, I spent my career in financial services and investment management. And my role was building products and bringing those to market and making them available to consumers through financial advisors specifically. In my personal life, I have a child who was born with a significant disability. And she has some scars, physical scars, and we all have the emotional baggage that comes with that and that experience. I brought that to a discovery of the giant hole where a robust financial services solution for financial planning for families caring for a loved one with a disability should have existed. And it became my passion project and then business project to build a solution that was driven by families, engaged financial advisors, and really brought best-in-class financial solutions and products and technology to families who should have an expectation of current, easy-to-use, great financial products to do their financial planning with.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think most of the viewers probably know who I am. I've been doing this for 12 years, disability planning. So let's focus really on what is a special needs trust and how it differs from other types of trusts.
That's a great question, and we get this question all the time. At its most fundamental, a trust is an agreement. It's a relationship. It's an agreement between parties to care for assets for someone. The trust document, which is the written document that specifies the terms of the trust, you can really think about that as a set of directions for how these relationships should operate and will operate. A special needs trust specifically is just a kind of trust that also follows Medicaid rules so that the assets in the trust are viewed favorably by the Social Security Administration and Medicaid, and allow the person who is the beneficiary of the trust to obtain and receive benefits, public means tested benefits. So there are really two kinds of special needs trust. There's a first party trust, which is when a beneficiary puts their own money into a trust. And so you can see why it's called a first party. And a third party trust is a trust that's created when a contributor, a donor, a funder puts money in a trust, special needs trust, for someone else. So that's a really important distinction, primarily because for a special needs trust that is funded by one's own money, Medicaid will ask to be paid back for the services that they provided to the person with the disability over time. So we have to be mindful of that in our work, and we want everyone who's setting up a trust to understand that distinction, the payback, what's called Medicaid payback colloquially. So we talked about the component parts of a trust are the same for any kind of trust and any kind of special needs trust as well, whether it's a first or a third party. There's the document, the written directions I mentioned. There's definitely a beneficiary, or we wouldn't all be here, and their family and their loved ones, and their advisors. So we think about that as kind of the office of the beneficiary, all the people who are involved with the beneficiary in their world. There's a trustee who is the person who is in the trust document said to be the person who is responsible for stewarding those assets for the benefit of the beneficiary. So again, all trusts have these component parts. Then there's a whole bunch of administrative services. Money has to come in through to a bank. It has to be used. The bank sends the money out to pay the bills. There are books and records and account statements. In our case, there's a portal, a beneficiary and family and advisor portal, so people can go in and see what's going on with their trust. And there's tax reporting. So there's some bookkeeping for sure that's associated with making sure that everybody knows what's going on with their trust and it can be properly reported and taxes can be paid. There are also, of course, investments in the trust. So we have two fabulous partners who we work with for both the administrative components, the custody, the banking services. They're critically important to the trust functioning, and that's Huntington National Bank, which is one of the largest banks in the country. Our investment partner is BlackRock Investment Management, which is a gigantic and extremely well-regarded and leader in investment management, and we're very proud to use their ETF portfolios in which to invest funds for the beneficiaries. So it's important to understand a little bit about the origin of special needs trusts. And historically, it's been a very lawyer-driven process for families. And the approach that folks have taken is to create little sort of individual mini trust companies for each individual trust, so that each beneficiary has their own trust document and their own setup of all the component parts I just described. That's a really, as you can imagine, a high cost way of doing anything. When you create a custom thing, it's much less expensive to go to a place and buy an already made product. So if I'm going to build a swing set in the backyard for the kids, the grandkids, I could build it myself. It's going to be exciting, and I'll have to make lots of runs to the supply store. The alternative is to go to a solution or a provider that has the trust, so to speak, already set up, and to establish an account. That model of creating a trust as opposed to the individual trust company is how we operate. That's called some people call it a pooled trust. I like to think of it and describe it because most people are familiar with retirement plans. So it's sort of like a 403B plan if you're in nonprofit work, or a 401k plan if you're in a company corporate model, where there's one plan for the whole company and everyone who works in the group, and everybody sets up their own individual account in their own name, and they own all of the money that's in their separate account. So that's the model that we really like. We think it's important and very helpful to families because it's already set up. We have tremendous economies of scale, and we can really bring some of really the latest technology and the latest investment tools and all of the things that make your contemporary bank and brokerage accounts work well, by partnering with the folks we've partnered with and constructing it this way. We can bring all of those things to our families, which is wonderful. So the other thing that I think is an advantage about the idea of being able to go and buy the already made swing set kind of thing with our trust, with Visible, is that you know exactly who you're working with. So if you're funding the trust right away and using it right away, you're going to be working with your trust provider right away. Sometimes people need to set the trust up. That's a thing we can help folks with. Set the trust up now and fund it later. And that happens a lot for a lot of parents and grandparents will set a trust up that way. And the hard part about that is it doesn't become alive. It's a testamentary trust, doesn't become alive until the donor passes away, in which case all the different people and component parts that we talked about will be brought together. But the person who set up the trust or who wrote the trust document with the attorney won't know who they're working with until after they're gone. So it's a difficult situation. And we love the idea of being able to work with our families and get to know people and how they want their beneficiary to be cared for and what the priorities are, so that we're known, everybody is known to one another, and it's not an urgent, we have to get to know you suddenly kind of situation.
Awesome. So you've touched on a couple times, you kept going back to families who have a child with a disability and the importance of setting up a trust. And I know I've heard or families ask, and I've seen it on different social media platforms where people ask, well, I think my child's going to be okay. What if do I really need a trust? So what are some of the key benefits of having a special needs trust for families with a loved one with a disability? I mean, what's really the secret sauce, if you will, of why they should be doing it?
Absolutely. No, that's a great question is, who benefits and why is this an important thing to do for families? So the logic is very understandable. And we are all familiar at this point with the increased costs of healthcare and other kinds of any sort of alternative therapy, any other thing that we want to do to care for ourselves. It's gotten really expensive. There's no sign of that letting up, which means that caring for a person with a disability over their whole life is a fairly expensive proposition, and can cost easily hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Even if you are economically very successful, that's still going to be a strain on most families. And that's a huge issue. The other thing that happens is, I mentioned this care going on over a lifetime. If it goes on over a beneficiary's lifetime, the primary caregivers or the original caregivers, so to speak, of the person with a disability, whether it's a child or a sibling or someone else in the family, the original caregivers will be gone also. So you need to establish some financial resources because stuff isn't going to get paid for any other way. And you need to do it over a period of time that might not include your own life. So those are hugely important things. There are, of course, benefits available. They are thought to be essential benefits and described as essential benefits. And that's great, but they don't cover different kinds of therapy choices or treatment choices and other things that are related to enjoyment of life. And so families often, of course, want to make sure there are funds available to secure that level of comfort for their loved one. That's really important. These benefits, these essential benefits, are described as being means tested, which means before you can access them, the government needs to count your current money. And you can't have very much of it if you literally, in the small handful of thousands of dollars, a person can't own more than that amount and be eligible for benefits. So this money that you saved because of the cost and all the other things we've talked about has to be someplace where the government won't count it and won't do that math. That vehicle is called a special needs trust, where the funds are professionally managed. You can put in an unlimited amount of money, and they're formally invested, institutionally invested. That the only vehicle that is structured that way and treated that way is a special needs trust. There is also an ABLE account, which is tends to have smaller balances in it, and we're a fan of, if you qualify for an ABLE account, go right ahead and open one up. They really serve two different purposes. One is a self-managed solution, the ABLE, and a trust is what we talked about in terms of lifetime and beyond lifetime and professional management and integrated relationships. So it's a totally different kind of thing. Um, and in order to be able to use a special needs trust, you do have to qualify for Social Security disability. That does not mean you need to be taking benefits right now. It means we need to understand that you could if you applied for them to be eligible. So we get asked that question a lot about, I have a loved one, we're not using benefits right now, but I anticipate because I will not be here forever that that's a possibility. How do I do that? So we can help with that as well.
And you addressed one of the misconceptions that I sometimes feel like beating my head against the wall with is it has to be either a special needs trust or an ABLE account. And it's as you pointed out, it's not either or, it's really more of an and. Yes,
Mhm.
and another common misconception you addressed already is that there's 3 or 4 different types of special needs trust. A lot of people will say a pooled special needs trust is its own kind of special needs trust, and it's not. It's just a way of managing a first and third party trust.
Exactly.
So those are 2 misconceptions that I can think of top of mind that you've already addressed. Do you have some more common ones that you encounter pretty often?
I think one of the most important is for for families considering who have been working with an attorney or who have a trust that was written by an attorney and is set up and has so they have a trust document. That is not the same thing as setting the trust up. So we talk to a lot of families, both of us, who have worked with an attorney. There is an existing trust document. Um, but all that really does, it's a rule book. It's really it's great that exists and the family has gotten to that point in their planning process, and we always applaud that. Um, but what it isn't is a roadmap to establish all the parties to the account and the operations of the trust. It's literally the rules. So we want families to really make sure they understand that, and if there is a need to actually have a trust that exists and is working, that they take a different set of steps to get to that point. We can help with that. But that is really, really important. Um, I
And
would say also, yep,
before you move on, let's just go a little deeper into that if you don't mind. So the rule book is important because you need it, but you also need a trustee. And the attorney
mhm,
doesn't appoint a trustee. I mean, some attorneys may serve as trustees.
yep,
Um, but if you don't have a trustee readily available, and then you go to a corporate trustee and ask a corporate trustee like a bank or something to take over to manage your trust, in my experience, I'm not going to say all, but some are going to tell you, no, we're not going to manage somebody else's trust document. You can
exactly.
join us, and we have our own trusts that we want to manage. And it's which makes sense, right? If you take a document drafted by one attorney, you go to another attorney and ask them to do something, they're going to want to put their own flavor to it. They want to make sure they know what's in the document.
Yep.
So I think that's an important piece. And I'm personally not a huge fan of having family member service trustees because as you were very clear about, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts in these special needs trusts. And a family member who's doing it part-time or maybe doesn't know much about investment management, there's a reason we have financial advisors. There's a reason we have attorneys. It can be tough if you have, and I'm just going to pick on somebody, a school teacher, for example, and I'm no shade on school teachers. I just somebody
Yep.
who you would typically not think would be very well versed. Um, then you could really be setting both them and the beneficiary up for future problems.
Yes.
The
I,
other reason I'm not a huge fan of beneficiaries is or family members being trustee for the
yep.
beneficiary is think of siblings,
Right.
and having a brother or a sister having to say no and how hard that could be.
Mhm.
even though it's the right thing for the trust. And I'm going
Mhm.
to be quiet there and just let you talk. I just wanted to get that out.
No, I think that's great, and you make such an excellent point. The having a family member who is a school teacher or a doctor or any sort of professional person, non-professional person, it doesn't really matter. The point is, unless they work professionally as a trustee already, they have no way of really easily keeping up with the rules, the changing regulations, the new Social Security rules, which evolve all the time. It's kind of an impossible and a little bit of an unfair task. Um, I think there's some risk there. Certainly burnout, it can be damaging to relationships, to your point about the having to say no to someone you love. That's not great. And so we think it's really important for family members to be able to be family members and not have to act in the role of the professional trustee. Because there's just there's no school curriculum for that. And it is a job, and there's a certain amount of liability to that as well. Should somebody ask about how's it all going? Are you doing it right? Nobody wants to be put in that position, especially when they're caring for somebody they love. So we think I think that's really important. Um, the other thing I wanted to touch on is this has historically the costs of owning a special needs trust have not been made public. So when you use another kind of financial product, you put your money in a bank in a higher yielding account, you'll know what your interest is. You can ask the bank what it costs to have your money managed in that account. You can certainly do the same thing with a mutual fund or an ETF. Um, other types of brokerage costs and transaction costs. Special needs trusts have not been, as a rule, in the disclosure business. There is no formal process for doing that. There is no prescribed structural way to convey that information. We do that right on our website in our fact sheet about Visible National Trust. Um, and we think it's really important if you are, whoever your trust provider is, if you have one now or you're looking for one, to understand two things: the corporate strength and the qualifications of the people working in serving the family with the trust, and also what does it all cost? Are there transaction fees for checks? What are the investment fees? What are the banking fees? What is the tax prep fee? All of that should be fully disclosed and readily available. We think that's really important. So we do that ourselves, of course. And we actually have a fee comparison um, table that we share along with our fees so that people can, if they're making a choice or just thinking this all through, can kind of noodle on that at their own pace.
Yeah, and I want to caution people about focusing 100% on fees in the sense of you don't want to just grab a close friend or family member because you don't have to pay them to be a trustee. There is something to be said for paying for professional services.
Mhm.
Speaking for myself, I'm big on outsourcing, and sure, I could try to figure it out. YouTube is great nowadays. You're going to probably be watching with this video on YouTube. But if it comes down to getting it done right the first time, or as you said earlier, making multiple trips, I'd much rather just go with the professional, even though it might appear to cost more upfront.
Yep. Yep. And one of the things that was really important to us when we were building Visible is to make sure that cost is not a barrier, um, either initial upfront cost or ongoing. And so there is no fee to join to open an account. We don't have an account opening fee. We don't have an account closing fee. Um, we we charge annual fees, which are similar to that's the way all financial product fees are assessed, unless it's a commission, which doesn't count here. Um, so Absolutely. And, price is only an issue in the absence of value. And we are certainly providing a lot of value, and it's really up to every family to make sure they identify what they value, what the solution is that's going to work best for them and their loved one, and to make sure that they're paying a fair price for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there anything else you wanted? I'm keeping it to just the 3 questions today. I've got several more for future months.
Yep.
But and I want to give this opportunity too for those viewing this now or at a later date. If you have questions, email ejorgensen at capitalmotionllc.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to add them to the list of things to ask Lisa. Or if you have questions for me, we can flip the script and Lisa can be the facilitator.
Yeah, that's great.
But
Love it.
Lisa, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I think, I do think that really thinking about what's most important to you and your family, we families always ask about how do they participate. And that's really important. That's not something we can decide for a family. So families do need to kind of noodle on, or I would encourage people to really think about how do they want to operate in relationship to the trustee, the services for the beneficiary, and one another. So that we make an opportunity for everybody to tell us how they will be interacting with the beneficiary and the trust, whether it's a voice, whether it's visibility into the account and transactions. But we can't decide for a family how that should work. So that's a really important thing. I think bringing that to a conversation is super helpful.
And along those lines, making sure that whoever you're working with knows who your professional advisors are too, because there's a lot of value that the professional advisor brings to the conversation. Again, just from a personal point of view, there have been a lot of situations in my life where having that impartial point of view helped me deconstruct. Okay, here's what I took away from that meeting, but I'm really kind of emotionally charged, good or bad. But there, I had a lot of things going on in my head.
Yep.
What did I miss, or was there nuances? Did I misunderstand something? And having that professional who this is the world they live in day after day, a financial advisor, for example, or an education advocate or something, to be there in those
Absolutely.
meetings is really, really helpful too. So you want to make sure those are identified, who are going to be the team members.
Yes, exactly. Who are the professionals? It's not just family, but it's everyone in that kind of office of the beneficiary, whether it's professional advisors, financial advisors, absolutely, and any other professional advisors the family may have in place. We want to know who everybody is, and we're here to support. We know financial advisors are working with families right now to create comprehensive wealth plans and financial plans for their families. And we we have really worked hard to make sure that Visible could be a part of the solution set that advisors bring to their clients, because there just hasn't been a solution like this until now. So Visible makes it possible for families to start this process with their advisor, which is great. And anybody can come to us. Whoever calls us first, we'll start with you. But if it's a family who's working with an advisor, we're going to encourage connection all through the process and support that however we need to. And we're here for that.
No, this has been awesome, Lisa. Thank you. Viewers, listeners, again, if you like this content, stay tuned. First Tuesday of every month, we'll be having trust talks. You can send your questions, topic considerations, topic ideas to us. We're more than happy to entertain them and bring the ones to the masses that we think best align with what we're trying to accomplish, which is get more information out there about disability planning, specifically using a trust. And if you have other questions about disability planning, be sure to check out Visible's YouTube channel. We have a very active YouTube channel. I encourage you to check it out, subscribe. Lisa, did you want to add anything else before we get going?
Just a big thank you to you. What an awesome job. You're so good at this. I love it. And thanks to everybody for joining us.